Why have we come to earth? Do you remember? Why have we taken birth? Do you remember?
Thank you, Martin. I love Martin's music. He creates spontaneously, just on the fly. That's not a planned, rehearsed, written down somewhere piece. It's just letting it flow, right? No? Pardon me? Those are practice pieces. Okay. I know I come in here sometimes to hear him playing, and it's just flowing. So, thank you. How's everybody? Good. Me too. So we're continuing on this theme that we're going to be working with for this whole year of creating a world that works for all. And today we're going to be taking a look at the idea of that we are all individual expressions of an infinite creator. You and I are individualized expressions of an infinite creator. And Ernest Holmes, out of his What We Believe, expresses it this way: this one manifests itself in and through all creation, but is not absorbed by its creation. And so what we're saying is the one is the creation, and yet it's greater than the creation. And this is, if you've been around this movement for a little while, and a long time ago people would ask you, what is it exactly you believe? And you might have said something like, well, it's kind of like the Force in Star Wars. Anybody ever, use that? So it is, but it's a little bit different because according to Star Wars, the Force is the energy of all living things co-creates the Force. Whereas this says the energy of all living things, but it's more than all living things. So it's a little bit beyond that. It's a different story than the story many of us grew up with of a god or set of gods. Most of us grew up with a god, but a set of gods, which is the long-time traditional story of human beings, who set the world in motion and then stepped away from it. Created it, boom, 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 rolled it out of dough or whatever it was, bowled it down the alley and see, how it fares. Okay? A lot of us grew up with that kind of a god that created it, set it off, and is watching it and judging everybody on it to see how we're doing. You've heard that story before. Okay. So it's not that story. What we're working with is an infinite presence that is co-creating, constantly creating this world, and we are one of it. We are the universe becoming conscious of itself. We are this infinite one becoming conscious of itself. So we are participants in this constantly being created universe. That's exciting. To me, that's exciting. And sometimes scary because, it's like when you're playing a piano piece and you're just spontaneously flowing, you might hit a wrong note. A wrong note. Whose idea of wrong that is, that's, up to interpretation. Miles Davis would tell us that there is no wrong notes in music, there's just new notes to riff off of, new directions to take. So yesterday, as I was writing this talk, I was writing this talk after having just come from a celebration of life service for Mrs. Isaac Howe, who was a prominent activist in racial rights and racial equality here in the community, and helping to establish. And I heard some of the stories of how it used to be back in the not so good old days, depending on who you were and what it was like. And I remember what it was like, when I grew up. I remember the first African-American family. I was in 8th grade when the first African-American family dared to show up in our parish and move into our neighborhood. And a whole lot of people in my nice, loving Catholic parish were very unhappy about that. My mother being one of those people. And so it's looking at that, and I was reflecting on the lines that we create to separate ourselves. And these lines that we separate and say, I'm better than you. You're different from me. Okay? And we separate them around race, we separate them around gender, we separate around religious beliefs. We separate around nationalities, we separate around economic status, political parties, we separate around states. You know, my state's better than your state, Northern California is better than, we all know Northern California is better than Southern California, right? You know? Those people down there, oh my God. And it's all better than Washington, D.C. Oh, those politicians, man. Okay. And we should form the state of Jefferson, right? We should form the state of Jefferson because that will change things. I suggest we form a new state of consciousness. Because we can form however many more states we want or secede states from any union, whatever it is that we want, but unless we do it with a consciousness that's different than what we've built everything with before, we will just build the same old thing over and over again. So we're here to look at how to start to shift that. In this book, there's a wonderful, he breaks it down in a wonderful way that there are 3 stories currently working on the planet. 3 ways of being on the planet. And I want to take a moment to read a little bit out of this book, if I can. If you'll bear with me. The first story is known as the Keeper story. The Keeper story is the original story. And I wanted to do an analogy real quick before I do that. It's been said that if all of the time that this planet has been in existence could be made into a movie 1 year long. So the very birth of the planet, the moment the planet started to exist, was on 12:01 a.m. January 1st, and right now is midnight on December 31st, okay? Life began on this planet at about March, somewhere in March. Okay, life began on this planet. Human life began on this planet with the last 11 minutes of the movie left to go. And the culture that we live in, which he calls the breaker culture, has been around for exactly 2 seconds of the movie. Interestingly enough, this culture has the ability to completely destroy all life on the planet. And it kind of reminds me of a person who can look at a beautiful redwood tree that's taken hundreds or maybe even 1,000 years to grow, and in 2 minutes or 5 minutes with a chainsaw, eliminate that life. We've all seen things. We just recently had ISIS bomb one of the, a couple of the temples over there that have been in existence for over 1,000 years just because they were a different faith and they didn't like them. Okay? And so we can very quickly end things that take us thousands of years to do. We can do that personally with trust, can't we? It takes us years to build trust and about 3 seconds to destroy it sometimes. So it's that consciousness, and I love that because he's talking about that in the dream, in that reading that we had, that sense of falling, and I'm not sure when I'm going to hit the ground. So we'll explore that later, but I want to look at the 3 stories. So the oldest story, the original story of humans, is the Keeper story. Keepers are people who live interconnected with their local ecologies and all other beings within that ecology. They keep the ancient ways of living, perfected over eons of coexistence. And their story is based on a thought, and that thought is living in harmony with all I encounter. And an assumption or a belief system, and that is the land is abundant. Okay? Keepers do not have a concept of Earth as a whole. They're only identified with their local ecologies. And within these ecologies, they have, over the course of 1 million years or more, achieved a dynamic equilibrium with all beings, including human and non-human beings. The ultimate expression of the Keeper story is the village, constructed with local materials and interrelated with the local ecology. So that's the oldest story. The second one is the Breaker story. The Breaker story is at present the dominant story for humans. Breakers are those who act as though everything on and in the earth were created for us, and that we have the right and responsibility to place it all under our control. The Breaker story is based on a thought, I am separate, and on a belief, there is not enough. Breaker behavior is based on control and manipulation of other beings. The ultimate expression of exclusivity, or this Breaker consciousness, is the city, where nature is almost totally suppressed. And he says it's worth noting that civilized values are those associated with city life. And the Latin word for city is civitas, civilized. The Mender story is the emerging story for humans. Menders are people who are conscious of the global ecology and the interactions of all the beings who make up that ecology. Members adapt the values of keepers to a global reality. The Mender story is based on a thought, we are one, and an assumption, there is enough for all. What I want to say about these three stories, first of all, is that they all exist within each of us. Each of us has a breaker consciousness, each of us has a keeper consciousness, and each of us has a mender consciousness already at work within us. So breathe that in for a moment. We settle with that. And so we take a look. That keeper understands itself locally. It has a harmonious relationship with its local ecology, but it doesn't see the global. It also does not have the technology it needs to really live full out and expand and express itself more. And so even today in keeper cultures, they oftentimes will not name the babies until they are a year old because it's a high mortality rate, a high infant mortality rate of things that in other parts of the world, diseases that have been cured and are easily handled. And yet in their culture, because they don't have the technology and the knowledge for how to do that, they haven't. Okay? And so they lack the technology. They're very aware of themselves as a tribe, as a group, but they're not aware of themselves as individuals, nor of themselves in the global, how it works on the whole planet. The breaker technology, the breaker consciousness has technology, has the ability to solve all these problems. Okay? And I love this, the way that he says it. It has intelligence about things, but it doesn't have wisdom, which is intelligence about relationships. And so we go about creating things that are not in harmony with the planet. A great example of that is Captain Cook, back in the 1700s when he was exploring through the Indian Ocean, came upon this island and thought it would be a great place to leave a few rabbits, because it was grassy island, plenty of grass in the island, leave a few rabbits for explorers who would come after him for a food supply, right? So he let a few rabbits loose on this island. There were no predators on the island. The rabbits pretty soon did what rabbits do. They multiplied and multiplied and multiplied, and pretty soon had eaten up the entire supply of grass on the island. And then, of course, with no food and no way to get off the island, they all died. And so today that island is a barren rock. No grass, no rabbits, nothing. Because Captain Cook didn't understand the relationship of what he was doing. And we've all done that, haven't we? We've done stuff in our own lives. We do things, something that seems wise at the time, intelligent at the time, and we don't understand the relationship of how it interacts with everybody else. I know I've done that. I think we all have done that. And so that's that. The breaker consciousness with the technology is valuable for our liberation and expansion as humans. And I don't want to make it, it's not a bad consciousness. It's a growing up consciousness. I like to say it's the adolescent consciousness. You know, me. I'm thinking about my world and how it works. I create separation. You ever been, in a high school among a bunch of teenagers? There's my group, and then there's that group, and then there's that group, and we like those, and we don't like those, and all that stuff. Not all teenagers are like this, but many of them are. And of course, nobody likes their parents, right? So we have this adolescent consciousness, and we're growing, and what we're being called to be is to move from being children of God to adults of God. And so we start to understand and start to co-create. And that's this Mender consciousness. And the Mender consciousness blends the relational wisdom of the keepers with the objective and global view of the breakers and the technology, the knowledge. And so in a way, I think of it as technology with heart, or technology with a global awareness. So I have a greater awareness of what I am doing as I am doing it. And that can be difficult to develop. When we recognize that all life is individualized forms of the one life, which changes our relationship with how we deal with each other, with how we deal with all of life. The combined thought or belief that I am separate and there is not enough creates a spiritual starvation in our lives. It's the reason there's so much suicide among many of the young people today, or the thought of suicide, the contemplation of suicide, is because if you're living with a world where I'm not going to get enough unless I sell out my soul and do what I don't want to do to get enough, and as I look at the world anyways, look at all the ecological problems and disasters, that we may not survive, I don't want to stay here. If that's my view of the world, if that's all I'm looking at, this doesn't work, that doesn't work, I'm out of here, man. Okay? That's that spiritual starvation that comes from that belief of I am separate and there is not enough. And it's the underlying core of all the pain in our culture. What's the antidote for that? The antidote for that is compassion. The antidote, which is compassion, is a form of love. And love is what we're here for. Love is what we're about. And I don't mean romantic love. I'm talking about the big cosmic spiritual love. God is love. That infinite presence is love. Every spiritual teacher, every mystic who's ever experienced it says that it's an experience of love that is unbounded, that is greater than we can even conceive of. And that's what this is. And so what we're looking for constantly is love. Now the cool thing is we're surrounded in love, right? But we don't recognize it. And so we can be like a child in one of those keeper villages that has dysentery, which is the inability of the body to take in nourishment and nutrition. What goes in just goes right on out. And if you add water to that child, it's not going to hydrate the child because they can't absorb the water. In fact, they'll strip more of the nutrients away and speed the death process. What the child needs is an ability for the body to be rebalanced, to be able to absorb what is being fed to it. And we're like that when it comes to love. See, if we can't absorb love, if we don't get that we're being given love, that we're living in love, if we can't take it in, then we can't give it out. Or as we give it out, it's just passing right through and we're not getting any. And we're working out of a feeling and a belief and an experience of not enough. The Buddha teaches us that it's not that we learn not from experience, but from our capacity to experience. See, experiences can come on by, right? We've all had experiences. How many of them stick? Do we have the capacity to look at that experience, to be with that experience, to learn from that experience, and to grow from that experience? Can we take it in? Do we have the receptors to allow that? Do we have the receptors to allow love into our beingness? It's one of the reasons that people, especially just people in general, are afraid to do what's known as shadow work. Shadow work is looking at those dark sides of our lives. It's usually where we've taken the painful feelings and memories and processes and shoved them off into a closet in a corner in our lives and said, I don't want to look at that, I don't want to feel that. Guess what? They're still over there working on us. We eventually have to look at those shadows, and the only way to start to heal those shadows is to walk through them, to go in and look at them and to walk through the process of that feeling. And it's not pleasant, it ain't pretty, and it's scary to do so, to start it. It's like that tumbleweed chasing us. That tumbleweed is the fear. And it's the fear that I'm going to be overwhelmed by this feeling. I'm never going to get out of it, and it's never going to end, and I'm going to sink into oblivion. And anybody who knows when they do the work that that's not really what happens. Eventually the feeling starts to go away. The feeling starts to be subjected to the love that we truly are and who we truly are. And so will we do that? Will we look at that? Will we allow ourselves to absorb to the experiences that we have, to absorb what we need to absorb? So we can't love unless we absorb that love. So the spiritual practice I want us to invite us to practice this week are two. And the first one is to remind ourselves that we are constantly receiving love. Everything is love. The chair you're sitting on is a form of love. This building is a form of love. The clothing you're wearing is a form of love. The money in your wallet and in your bank is a form of love. The car you drive, the house you live in, the street you walk down is a form of love. Because if God is all there is and God is love, it can't be anything else but that. Now, it doesn't mean it was always consciously done with love, right? We're not always consciously. I'm sure that the person who was building these chairs didn't sit there and say, I'm building this chair with great love for a congregation that's going to sit and enjoy them and be spiritually fed. They probably just said, I'm going to work, got to build more chairs today. Get a job, get my paycheck at the end of the day. But somewhere down underneath all that, there is still that infinite love in motion. There's the story of the architect who was walking by 3 bricklayers who were working on a building that he had designed, and he asked the first bricklayer, what are you doing? And he says, I'm laying bricks. What's it look like I'm doing? The second one said, I'm doing this job to feed my family. I love my family, and so I'm doing this job. And the third one said, I'm building a cathedral to God, which is what it was, by the way. It was a cathedral. 3 different visions of doing the same activity. I always loved the movie Like Water for Chocolate, not just because it's about chocolate. But in there, the woman who's the cook, whenever she cooks, if she's cooking and she's happy when she's cooking, everybody who tastes and eats her food becomes happy. If she's crying, everybody starts crying. If she's angry and upset, which she does at one point in the time in the movie, everybody gets really violently sick. Okay? And we're like that. Whatever we're doing, we're putting our energy into. And so if we can be conscious of putting our energy of love into all that we do, we're in the flow of the universe. We're in the flow of what's really happening. Most of the time, we're unconscious about that. The flow is still happening, by the way, right? We still have the chairs, we still have the walls, we still have the cars closed, all that we need. Because the love is so great that even when we're not conscious of it, it's still moving along. But how much better it is for us to work in alignment with that, and in consciousness, in an awareness with that love. So can I do what I do and love what I'm doing? And so that's a dance. So this week, we're going to remind ourselves that we are constantly receiving love. 3 ways to do that. One is to meditate on the infinite love. One of my favorite meditations, and one of the places I go when I get stuck, is to just simply remember I am immersed in the infinite love. I'm immersed in a field of infinite love. And just remember that over and over again until I start to feel it, until I start to know it. When I do visioning, we do what we call invoking the field of infinite love to start off the visioning. It's really not we're invoking the field, because the field already exists. We're invoking ourselves to remember that we're in the field. We're invoking ourselves to remember that I'm in the field of infinite love. And so from that, I'm going to start my visioning process out of love. The second practice we can do is to be aware of the ways love is being given to us. Pay attention this week and notice how love is being given to you. When you walked in, an usher handed you a program. They did so out of love. People have arranged this sanctuary, have taken care of this place out of love. People are running the sound booth right now and sending me signs of how much time I have left to go out of love. I'm doing this talk out of love, and you're here to hear it and experience it out of love. We're all here in this dance. Martin is playing the music out of love. Judy is playing the music out of love. Being conscious of the ways that we are loved. The police officer who pulls us over for going too fast is doing so, you ready? Out of love. I remember one time when I was young, I was on a motorcycle, and came up to a street, and a police officer on a motorcycle pulled up next to me. And while we were waiting for a red light, this guy on another motorcycle comes flying around the corner. You can see the sparks flying from the foot pegs as he slid around the corner and takes off down the freeway exit way, way, way over the speed limit. And I kind of looked at the officer expecting him to go after the guy. He looks over at me and he goes, I only work on the ones who want to live. Being aware of the ways that love is being given to us. What if we could be aware that everything that is being given to us, everything that happens to us, is being done in love? Is the universal love, the infinite love of the universe, giving this to us? How would that change how we deal with the world? Play with that. Just for a week. You can go back afterwards, okay? They know it's going to be tough sometimes. But what if we said everything is coming to me and being given to me out of love? Even if the other person isn't conscious that they're doing it that way. And the third way to dance in this being being aware that we're constantly receiving love, is to reconnect with ourself, our deep self, to reconnect with others, to be aware, what if every person I meet, I'm holding in love? And finally, to also listen deeply to the more than human world, the world of nature. One of the poets we had here on Rumi's Caravan the other night did a poem that talked about how we've lost the ability to listen deeply. To just listen deeply. When I was in my late 20s, I was in the Sierra Club's camera committee down in the Los Angeles area. And we were out on a photo shoot, and the weekend before that, all my camera equipment had just been stolen. So I went with them because I wanted to go to where they were going, but I didn't have anything to photograph with. And so while I was there, the girlfriend of one of the other photographers kind of motioned me over. She was Native American, very in touch with the land. She motioned me over and said, "Come over quietly." And so I did, and we watched this bunch of bushes that was here. It was kind of a coastal environment. And very quietly, after I settled down, this mouse would run from one bush to the next. And then a small bird, would hop along following the mouse, and then a rabbit would hop along following the small bird. And these three little beings went from bush to bush to bush to bush in that train, in that order. So it's sort of like if the mouse makes it, the bird would go, because they're aware of the hawks overhead. If the bird makes it, the rabbit would go. And they worked their way through this, where the bush, this maze of bushes to wherever they were going, in this harmony, in this, togetherness, in this team energy. And I would have never seen that if I had been busy running over here with the photographers taking pictures of all the wonderful, beautiful crashing ocean waves. It took sitting and listening and being with nature quietly to observe this. So my invitation is that this week we spend some time just being quiet and observing and being with and listening deeply to nature. So that's practice number one, is reminding ourselves that we are continuously receiving love. Practice number two, remembering our oneness with all in every encounter. In every encounter. And note any belief in separation or not enoughness that arises. And when we notice that, notice how we feel, and then forgive ourselves for it, and love ourselves anyways. Because if you're like me, you will fall off that wagon probably pretty quickly. It'll probably happen the same the moment I go home and start watching a football game. I want this team to beat that team. I reminded the congregation the first service that it might fall in place the first time we take the collection. And I comes up with, I'm separate and I don't have enough. And so just noticing that and getting ourselves back into alignment with, I am one with the infinite, and I live in a world of infinite abundance. See, we live in the world of infinite abundance. We may not know how to work that world. We may not understand all the process of accessing what's here, but it's here. In the Bible, it tells us the gift is already given. The infinite has already expressed all that it needs to express and is already all that it needs to be. And we just get to play with accessing what it is. It's sort of like having, the opportunity to realize that we have a savings account with a huge amount of money in it, but not knowing how to access the savings account. It comes every once in a while when I get on my computer and I forget my password. I've got all this information on the internet, and if I don't remember my password, I don't know how to access it. Okay? And so, can we access this infinite abundance? And if we don't, are we willing to learn how to do that? But recognize that there is an infinite abundance we get to play with. So that's our two spiritual practices this week. Remind ourselves that we are constantly receiving love, and to remember to practice this oneness, that whoever we see is one, an individualized expression of the infinite. Can we do that this week? Will you play with me this week in that? Great. If you do so, and if you have a powerful experience or even a small experience, would you shoot me an email and just let me know what it is? Because when people hear how other people are using this, are accessing this, are playing with this, it supports all of us in growing together. See, we're a tribe also here. And so we get to support each other. It's not just, I'm just over here having my own little experience. It's, no, your experience is tied to my experience, is tied to everyone else's experience. And as we all share what that's like, we all grow from that. We've been in groups where one person starts to share and another says, oh yeah, that reminds me of this, or that made me think about that. And so can we share and play? So I want to invite you to, if you would, if you have some sort of an experience out of playing with these two practices, shoot me an email. Let me know if I can share it from the pulpit. Let me know if you would like to come up and share it. Okay? And some of you have massive fear of speaking up in public, so that's fine. But just, let me know how you're working with it. I would appreciate it. And if you want to let me know and you say, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want it to be told, let me know that too. But I still would love to know that and hold that in consciousness for you. I want to close with a quote from Albert Einstein. A human being is part of the whole, called by us universe. A part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separate from the rest, a kind of delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature and beauty. So that is our task, to free ourselves from this belief that we are little beings separate from each other by compassion, by expressing more compassion, widening our circle of compassion to include all living creatures and the earth itself. So I invite us to play with that this week, to widen our circle of compassion. Let us move into prayer. And so there is this one infinite presence that is pure love. A love that is so infinite and so deep that we can't comprehend it, and yet we live, move, and have our being in it. All who have penetrated the veil, all who have experienced this, have experienced this deep love, this infinite love. And so we allow ourselves to remember that because that presence is all there is, we ourselves have to be one of it. There's nowhere else to be. We are included in aspects of, individualizations of this one love. This is who each of us and all of us collectively truly are. This is the truth of our nature. And so I speak my word that we keep that truth in the forefront of our minds. Then when we forget it, when we get knocked off of it by some experience, we come back and we remember this truth, and we remember to take ourselves back, not to get caught up in the effect, the result of that, but to go back to the cause and to see where we separated ourselves, and to remember our basic core unity, our basic core enoughness. Because that is the truth of each and every person who is here. That is the truth of each and every person on this planet, of each and every being, of each and every form of life on this planet. We are all one, and there is enough for all. We take this consciousness and we begin to express that to build our world, and to build a world that works based on that consciousness. It's a world that is based on that love, that compassion, that awareness of the enoughness, that knowing and that trusting that even if we don't know how to access that enoughness right now, we will find a way. The way will be made known. And so for each of us who is saying yes to this, for each of us who is willing to play on this path, for each of us who is awakening to and remembering our oneness with the infinite and our enoughness, I'm so grateful. I release this word knowing it is a word of power spoken into the infinite presence, into the law that moves it into form and expression and experience in our own individual lives right here and right now. And so it does. And together we anchor that by saying, and so it is. Thank you.